What's going on, Dr. Hammer? Another review, going solo again for Kill Bill this time. Um, Overall, thought it was a very good movie. Like, obviously very entertained throughout the movie. It's hard to not be entertained by a Tarantino film. Um, I thought the plot was like easy to follow, but it was still kept you like on the edge of your seat, kind of like wondering what's gonna happen next. And I think the biggest thing for me with Tarantino films isn't necessarily the plot, but it's just like the dialogue that he's able to like roll out. And like mentioning like writing dialogue is probably like the hardest part of a film, but I just feel like every Tarantino movie I've seen has just done that so well, and like that is what has kept me engaged. So I thought that was also cool, and now I'm also like noticing just like this mega ultra violence. I like I'm just sort of starting to see that as a Tarantino thing. Before I was like thinking it was like, you know, using that as an illusion to like pay homage to like older style films, or just like, you know, the low budget like extra goofy violence. So sort of struggling to understand like what that is, or if that's just Tarantino's style, like that's just what he wants to do. He can, you know, just does what he wants, which is also cool. No problem with that. But I guess like the biggest part of our discussion in class, and like reason for picking this movie is just because of like what we said about women in film. And that's sort of like when I finished watching it, I just sort of struggled with that. Like, did it fulfill that purpose? Like, does it, you know, am I left satisfied? Or like, am I left happy with like women's representation in film? Or is it just like, this is a movie that happens to have a female lead? And I don't know, like, if that was what we were getting at with our discussion in class. I was a little bit cloudy in terms of like what problem we were trying to solve. But like my takeaway on that, and obviously I'm not in a position to like speak for anyone else in our class, but like I still thought that like the plot of this movie doesn't really do that discussion much justice, just because like, well, like having the women in the film, or like the female lead, like Uma Thurman, she is this just like badass character, like badass main character. But if you look at the plot, it's still like all centered around a man like finding Bill. Like her whole story is just vengeance against Bill, and like Bill seems to be the one who's like in control the whole time. Like he knows like what her moves are going to be, and just like he's kind of managing the situation. Like he knows like her child is still alive, all that stuff. So like he's holding on to information that our main character doesn't have, who's female. He's also like using other women as like devices to like, you know, fight against her. So it's just sort of like, does the plot give that discussion justice? And like just strictly speaking from the plot, I wouldn't say that it does. But one thing that I would say is like the style of the movie. Like I mentioned like dialogue before, like having witty characters and giving them power through dialogue, I feel like is, you know, it's a step above just like having one person beating everyone else up. I'm maybe explaining this poorly, but like I thought the same thing with Django. Like having him be the smartest guy in the room, like the wittiest one and like the quickest to think, I think that gave him an extra sense of power. It wasn't just his like, oh, he was stronger and he just ended up winning all the battles. Like that wouldn't be enough. Like I feel like that's just too simple. So in this case, like just having women beating up a bunch of men, that would be too simple. Like it's almost pandering. But like having the women be like the smarter, more witty characters and like the quicker to think on their feet, I think that is like a certain level of power, and like does them a certain level of justice that I feel like more satisfied with. Um, I kind of like going back to our discussion with like Mad Max. I mentioned like, is it enough for the female character in this to like be the one who like wins the battle for them? Like, is that enough, or is that just like pandering almost? Obviously, like I said, I'm not in a position to speak for like women who may feel a certain way, but I do think it's like an interesting discussion. Maybe we'll open up in class. Um, but yeah, overall, I would, like, going back to the movie as a whole, like I mentioned, I really liked it. Thought it was very entertaining. And then as it pertained to our like discussion about women in film, I think all in all, it did a good job of like doing it justice, like I mentioned, by using dialogue as the device to give them power versus just um, they happen to be the one that wins battles. That balance I think was overall well done. So looking forward to talking about it in class. I'll see you then.